Hey Hermits, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dara and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So over the past week I celebrated my birthday. I turned 31 and as I was reflecting on that, I decided to look up some books that you should read in your 30s, that kind of thing. And what I came across, as well as some of those lists, were a lot of books that you should have read by the time you're 30, according to various different sources. So we've got different websites, different newspapers, all kinds of different sources of information. And there were a lot of books on there, and I thought it was really interesting looking at the variety of books and how many I've read, how many I haven't read, what interests me, what doesn't interest me, and how in a lot of cases you can very much tell that these lists were put together by your typical privileged white man, but that's okay. Anyway, I digress. I thought it would be fun to pull together more of a comprehensive list inspired by all of these different sites so that I could take a real look at whether I actually did read the books you're supposed to read by the time you turn 30. So what I'm going to do is I've got this list here. I think I have 101 books on this list. We've got all different genres here. We've got all different levels of classic. We've got formats. There's a big old variety here, and I'm not going to go in depth about what each of these books is about because, for starters, a lot of them I haven't read, and for seconds, this would make a really long video. So I'm just going to give a one-line summary, which is predominantly inspired by the Goodreads description if I haven't read it myself. And we're going to look at things that I have read, things that I haven't but are kind of on my wish list, so I want to read them soon, haven't and want to read them someday, meh, so I feel very neutral about it, and hard pass. I just thought it'd be really interesting to see what kind of split we have going on here. So let's dive straight in. So the first book on my list is How Proust Can Change Your Life by Alain de Botton. And this is part Proust biography, part self-help. I feel very meh about this book, haven't read it. The Swimming Pool Library by Alan Hollinghurst, a darkly erotic novel of homosexuality before the AIDS epidemic. Again, feel very meh about that one. Open Secrets by Alice Munro, short story collection filled with 8 tales of old love. I feel like that's a someday one for me. The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. In 1949, 4 Chinese women, recent immigrants to San Francisco, meet weekly to play mahjong and tell stories of what they left behind in China. That's a possibly someday book because I have read something else by the same author and enjoyed it. So yeah, someday. Operating Instructions by Anne Lamott. The most honest, wildly enjoyable book written about motherhood is surely Anne Lamott's account of her son Sam's first year. Meh. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. This actually appeared on 2 separate lists, so I thought I should mention that. This is the coming of age story of 2 twin boys in Kerala. Hard pass for me, and I'll tell you why. So one thing that I typically just don't enjoy is a coming of age story, and then another thing that I don't enjoy is a book about young boys. So it's a coming of age story about 2 young boys, so it's probably just not going to be one for me. The Selected Works of Audre Lorde, I own that. It's a poetry collection and I definitely do want to read it someday. I actually have the complete collection rather than the selected works, so it's not one that I would necessarily sit down and read cover to cover, but it is one that I've already started and that I'm just dipping into and working through slowly. All About Love by Bell Hooks. This also appeared on 2 lists. That is a non-fiction exploration of what it means to give and receive love, so I'm going to say that's a someday book. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. So that is a non-fiction book. Again, this time diving into the physical and emotional impact of trauma. That is on my wish list. It's a topic that I'm really interested in. I've read extensively and studied extensively already, and this is a text that so many people recommend and have recommended to me personally, so definitely wishlist. Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. It's a love story between two young Black British artists, and it's one that I already own, so it is one that I want to read. In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. It's a memoir focused on a same-sex toxic relationship. Again, I own this one, so it is one that I want to read imminently. The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. One ordinary woman's story of her journey through life. I actually used to own it and I ended up unhauling it because I just wasn't interested in reading it. So I'm going to say that that one is in the meh category. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I've read that many a time. It is that classic tale of a young orphan who works really hard, like gets a job in a scary gothic manor and starts developing feelings for her cantankerous boss who has secrets of his own. Read it many a time, will probably read it many a time more before I die. Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. This is another one that I've read. So this is a collection of, well, I don't know if you want to call it essays. So essentially Cheryl Strayed used to have an advice column called Dear Sugar. And it's a collection of like questions and answers from the advice column. I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. There were definitely things that I could relate to and implement in my own life. Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Two young Nigerian lovers are forced apart by circumstances and reunite after 15 years. This one also appeared on 2 different lists, and it's another one that I just feel very meh about. I've heard like loads of people mention it in passing that it's a great book, but I haven't heard much about like what's great about it, if you know what I mean. Fight Like a Girl by Clementine Ford, a call to arms for feminists everywhere. That is a Sunday book. I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, a diary chronicling the eccentric goings-on of a 1930s family. I own that book, so I do really want to read it soon. I think it will also be like quite a light, fun classic for when I'm sort of just on the periphery of a classics mood. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I own this. This is, you know, a much loved dark academia novel, often considered to be the first dark academia novel. It also came up on my 22 books to read in 2022 list, so I will link that in the description if you haven't watched that yet. But it is definitely one that I want to read. House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, a story chronicling the restraints placed on unmarried women in society in the early 1900s. That is a someday book. The Dud Avocado, great title, by Elaine Dundee. The comedic adventures of a young American travelling to Paris in the 1950s. That is on my wish list. My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. That's the first book in a quartet that is kind of like a portrait of a single friendship between 2 women. I own the full quartet, and so I do want to read them all at some point, obviously starting with My Brilliant Friend. A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. Repressed Edwardians having a wild time in Florence. That is a someday book for me. Maurice, also by E.M. Forster. I hadn't actually heard of that one before seeing these lists. But that is an Edwardian homage to same-sex relationships. Again, it's a someday book for me. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I have read it and I do not recommend. Hard pass, hard pass, hard pass. It is essentially the story of many toxic people doing toxic things, with a few, you know, nice dramatic descriptions of landscape and emotional turmoil. Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. That is a non-fiction book all about female sexuality, and it is one that I do want to read. I own it. It's on my Kindle. I do want to get to it. Animals by Emma Jane Unsworth. I also own this. I think I have the audiobook of this. 2 young women used to tearing it up together are tested when one of them gets engaged and is starting to settle down, and the other one just wants to continue living their wild girl life. Fear of Flying by Erica Jong. Bored with her marriage, a psychoanalyst's wife embarks on a wild, life-changing affair. So I would have said this was on my wish list, but now I actually own this one because I recently purchased it in a vlog. And so a vlog that you might have seen already, I think you have, that I recorded last week. But I picked it up with a gift card that I had for Waterstones. So now it's on my own list and very excited to read. Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel. So this is another non-fiction about the anxieties that come up when desire for security clashes with a pursuit of passion. That is a someday book for me. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I've read, did not enjoy. I've read it multiple times, in fact. Just a no from me. Metropolitan Life by Fran Lebowitz, an essay collection about fads and fashions in the US. I feel very meh about that one. Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It's a magical realist epic love story that I think spans 50 years between this couple. It's something that I own and I do want to read. 1984 by George Orwell, snapshot of futuristic hell, hard pass from me. The Quiet American by Graham Greene, an exploration of love, innocence and morality in Vietnam. It's a meh for me. I'm not that captivated by the idea of that one. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This appeared on 2 lists and it is a hard pass for me because everything I've heard about it tells me that it is just trauma porn, that is just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and for me, I need something else in a book. I don't read to be destroyed anymore. Maybe when I was at peak emo phase, that's what I wanted from my reading experiences, but not anymore. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. That is also a hard pass for me, and I'm saying that for a lot of these, I know that so many of them are good books. Obviously they're good books, otherwise they wouldn't have made this list at all. But there are just things that I'm looking for in my reading these days that some of these books will not deliver. So I want books that ultimately leave me feeling happy and hopeful. And so a lot of the hard pass books here are not those. So we all know that, the topic of To Kill a Mockingbird. I never actually studied it at school, but I think most people have. It's a look at childhood and prejudice and privilege in a sleepy southern town and the crisis of conscience that comes when those 3 things sort of get smushed together. Like I said, not for me. Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. I'm undecided about that one because I loved the film when it came out and I've seen it so many times. It's a 1990s retelling of Pride and Prejudice. We know the story well. I'm just concerned that if I read it now, I am really not going to appreciate a lot of the body image conversation that is in the book. So I know there are aspects of that in the film too. But I feel like where I am with my relationship with my body right now, I don't know if I'll vibe with it. And I bounce between feeling neutral about reading it and wanting to read it. So I'm not quite sure where I land on that one right now. And then we have Boy Snow Bird by Helen Oyeyemi, a moving novel about 3 women and the strange connection between them. Wishlist. The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. Read. It was one of the classics that I studied at university and I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed the writing style and also the plot and the characters. On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan. Hard pass. So this is the wedding night of 2 young virgins in the 1960s. I just don't want to read anything by that author. Ever since I saw Atonement, the film adaptation, I was like, whoever came up with this, I don't want to read anything that they put into the world. No. Which, speaking of which, Atonement is the next on the list. So that is a war-torn tale of tragedy and betrayal. Again, hard pass. That film gave me nightmares. Behold the Dreamers by Mbolo Embre, a tale of a Cameroonian immigrant in Harlem around the time of the market crash. Hard pass. So I do not like anything that is like particularly focused around the time of the market crash. Like that's just a weird personal preference of mine. Like I just don't like those stories. I think it makes me feel really just anxious about the financial future of the world, so I just stay away from those books. Another Country by James Baldwin, an exploration of the many forms of love and longing, that is on my someday list. Giovanni's Room, which is another one that came up on 2 lists and is also by James Baldwin. A queer classic about a recently engaged man who embarks on an affair with a male bartender in Paris. That is something that I definitely want to read. It's on my wish list, in fact, so hopefully I'll get to it soon. A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. I have read this book and I cannot remember a single thing about it. I cannot remember the name of any of the characters. I can't remember the plot, but I know that I've definitely read it because I had to study it. What does that tell you? Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I have read this. It is an OG enemies to lover kind of tale. We probably all know it at this point. I've read it multiple times. In fact, I'm just listening to the audiobook again now as we speak. But, you know, it's a classic for a reason. Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino is an essay collection on the topic of self-delusion. That's on my someday list. I think that looks really interesting. A Book of Common Prayer by Joan Didion. The story of 2 American women in the derelict Central American nation of Boca Grande. I feel meh about that one. The Year of Magical Thinking, also by Joan Didion. A memoir of grief following the death of her husband. I also feel quite meh about that one. Slouching Towards Bethlehem, also by Joan Didion. A non-fictional portrait of America in the 1960s. That one is actually on my wish list. Ways of Seeing by John Berger, an influential book about art. I feel very meh about that one. The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz. The Tumultuous Life of Oscar and the History of the Family at Large, rendering with genuine warmth and dazzling energy, humour and insight the Dominican American experience. That's on my someday list, I think. That's something I want to read. The Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. The Portrait of a Nation from the Perspective of an Illegal Immigrant. I currently feel quite meh about that one, not because I don't think it's worth a read, but I think just at the phase of life that I'm in right now, I'm more interested in reading books on those topics that relate to an experience that might take place in the country I live in, so in England. Just because I feel like that's something that I need educating on more than the experience in the US, because I feel like I already have quite a decent understanding of some of these issues as they occur in America, just because we see a lot of books and TV shows and documentaries and things relating to that experience, and I don't feel like you see as many from a British perspective, which is something that I would definitely be interested in reading before I would want to read that one. Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. Someone with an infinite number of lives tries to change history. I'm going to say hard pass only because I've recently unhauled it. I owned it for many, many years, didn't read it. It came up in my Try a Chapter challenge, which I'll link to in the description, but I just, no, didn't want to read it. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This came up on 2 lists as well. A dystopian moral examination of how we treat the vulnerable and different in our society. Hard pass. It has never appealed to me. I am not a dystopia girly. If it says dystopia in the description, it is not going to be one that I pick up. The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. The unforgettable, heartbreaking story of the unlikely friendship between a wealthy boy and the son of his father's servant. I feel meh about that one because, like I said, I'm just not one for stories about young boys. It's just not my thing. At least not right now. Supper Club by Lara Williams. A sharply intelligent and intimate debut novel about a secret society of hungry young women who meet after dark and feast to reclaim their appetites and their physical spaces. Wishlist. Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. This appeared on 2 lists as well. I own this one. So this is a story of a marriage over the span of 24 years. And I know that it tackles the subject of secrets a lot. And because I own it, is one that I'm excited to get to. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy also came up on 2 lists. And it's also one that I already own. And this is a panorama of contemporary life in Russia and of humanity in general. I know it is very much also in the category of tragic love stories. So, you know, very much my jam. Self-Help by Laurie Moore, short stories about love and pleasure. I would say that's a someday book. Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich, the epic story about the intertwined fates of 2 Native American families, the Kashpors and the Lamartines. That's a someday book for me. I keep seeing recommendations of different books by Louise Erdrich, and I've never read any of her work yet, but I keep thinking that I want to, so I need to prioritize that soon. The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, a genre-bending memoir, a work of auto-theory, offering fresh, fierce and timely thinking about desire, identity and the limitations and possibilities of love and language. I'm feeling mad about that one right now. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, a dystopian, that word again, classic, where women are valued only if their ovaries are viable. Hard pass, because dystopian, and I've read 2 books by this author so far and really strongly dislike them both. So Cat's Eye, also by Margaret Atwood, the story of Elaine Risley, a controversial painter who returns to Toronto, the city of her youth, for a retrospective of her art. Again, hard pass. I just haven't enjoyed any books by that author so far. I do, however, own 2 more, so I might give her another go. Let me know if you think I should give Margaret Atwood another bash. The Millstone by Margaret Drabble, a novel about a young, inexperienced woman in the 1960s who becomes pregnant after a one-night stand wishlist. The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by the one and only Marie Kondo. I've read that one. I mean, you don't need me to tell you the synopsis. It's literally there in the title. It's all about tidying up. Money, a Suicide Note by Martin Amis, a story of an advertising man living the high life. I'm going to say hard pass for the same reason as Life After Life, because I've recently unhorsed this one, so obviously I didn't want to read it. The Group by Mary McCarthy. This came up on 2 lists as well. Mary McCarthy's most celebrated novel follows the lives of 8 Vassar graduates known simply to their classmates as The Group. It was giving me kind of waspy Heathers vibes, so it's gonna have to be wishlist. 1,000 Mornings by Mary Oliver. So I know that is a poetry collection with a focus on nature. I've heard really lovely things about her poetry, so wishlist. The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. A Chinese American woman tells of the Chinese myths, family stories and events of her California childhood that have shaped her identity. We'll say someday. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. I've read that, so that is I believe it's the first installment of her memoir. So she published a series of memoirs, all great. Like, she's such a captivating writer, beautiful poet, really like wise, insightful writing. But I can't always remember like what order the different titles go in, but I know I've read them. The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon, an unforgettable story about American romance and possibility, hard pass. The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje, a novel that traces the intersection of 4 damaged lives in an Italian villa at the end of World War II. That is a someday book for me for sure. Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zorner, an unflinching, powerful memoir about growing up Korean American, losing her mother and forging her own identity. Someday. The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, the story of a young woman in love with a man torn between his love for her and his incorrigible womanizing. That's a someday book too. The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid, a story of uneasy relationships in the wake of 9/11. hard pass, not for me. Exit West by the same author, Hermit. A magical realist story set on the brink of a civil war. Hard pass. Like, I'm not into that kind of discontent in my books. Like I said, I want things that leave me feeling happy and hopeful, and neither of those synopses give me those vibes. Passing by Nella Larson. I own this book, I haven't read it yet, but it's about a young woman who is passing as white. It's a really like teeny tiny classic, so I know when I start I will get through it really quickly. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. It's a letter from a son to a mother who cannot read. That is on my someday list. I've heard great things about Ocean Vuong's writing and his poetry in particular. I haven't read anything by him yet, but I do want to. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, a dreamlike story of a young man who sells his soul for eternal youth and beauty. I own that, I want to read it, I just haven't got to it yet. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. This is, I have read it and I did not enjoy it. I feel like it's such a basic, overly moralistic story. I know it's supposed to be an allegorical work that talks about like a spiritual awakening, but I honestly found it crap. I really did. And I don't understand why so many people talk about it as if it's the best thing that has ever been written, because honestly, it is not. The Book of Eels by Patrick Svensson is literally a whole book about eels. It is a hard pass for me because I do not like eels. So like, I'm gonna go on a brief tangent now, but my boyfriend is a keen fisher person, or an angler as he likes to call it. And so he is often regaling me with, interesting fishy facts. One of which is that eels can like walk around on dry land and climb. And since he told me that, all I can think about is like, what if an eel climbs up the side of my house and into my bedroom? That is just such a disturbing thought. So do I want to read a book about eels? No, I do not. When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. Spiritual Guidance for Difficult Times. That's a someday book. That's the kind of thing I would read. Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I'm going to count that as read. I did DNF it because I could not get on with the no quotation marks, especially when the character narrating has such a wordy inner monologue. It's really difficult to distinguish what is dialogue and what is just her thoughts. And I didn't enjoy it, and I wasn't expecting it, because Normal People, which is the next book on this list, I listened to via audio. And so I was like, oh my God, I love Sally Rooney's writing style. I love this book. And then when I went to read Conversations with Friends physically, I wasn't anticipating the quotation marks thing, and I hadn't heard anyone mention it, and it really, really bugged me. So maybe I would enjoy it more if I tried again via audio, but for now, wouldn't recommend. The Lonely Londoners by Sam Selvon. This is a classic award-winning novel of immigrant life in London in the 1950s. I have read this book, but I, again, really struggle to remember it. It's another one that I had to study at university, but I didn't have to do any assignments on it. So I think that's probably why I don't have such a vivid memory of it as I do with some of the other texts. Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. So this is a queer love story set in Victorian England. Absolutely my jam. Love a sapphic love story. Love anything set in Victorian England. So yes, it is on my wish list. The Transit of Venus by Shirley Hazard. A slow burn story of two Australian sisters seeking their fortunes in post-war England. I'm going to say someday for that one. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. A powerful analysis of the Western notion of woman and a groundbreaking exploration of inequality and otherness. Let's say someday. Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. A powerful new framework for understanding America's history and current crisis. So I feel like, again, this is one that I would want to pass on for now, just because, like I mentioned earlier, I feel like I see a lot about politics and society in the US and not so much about the same topics in the UK, and that's just something that I want to be diving into a bit more right now in my life. Beloved by Toni Morrison. Again, this showed up on 2 lists. A spellbinding and dazzling portrait of an escaped slave woman haunted by the past. That is definitely a someday book for me. I know that I want to read it one day. Ordinary Light by Tracy K. Smith, a deeply moving memoir that explores coming of age and the meaning of home against a complex backdrop of race, faith, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and a daughter. I'm a little bit meh about that one, just because if I am going to pick up a memoir, I want it to be, you know, a memoir of somebody that I'm familiar with, and I don't recognise the name of the author. So yeah, I'm not feeling hugely compelled to pick it up, but I get it, but also I don't think it sounds terrible, so I'm just neutral about that one for now. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. So this is a groundbreaking work of science fiction, telling the story of a lone human emissary to Winter, an alien world whose inhabitants can choose and change their gender someday. To The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, an examination of the complex tensions and allegiances of family life and the conflicts between men and women someday. Mrs. Dalloway, again by Virginia Woolf, a vivid portrait of a single day in a woman's life someday. A Room of One's Own, again by Virginia Woolf, an extended essay based on a series of lectures that the author delivered. I would go for that. So let's say someday. The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, a founding work in the literature of Black protest. That is a someday book also. One of Ours by Willa Cather, a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about the making of an American soldier. Hard pass. That's just not the kind of thing that I would want to read. White Teeth by Zadie Smith, an ecstatic hodgepodge of modern life, flirting with disaster, confounding expectations, and embracing the comedy of daily existence. That's a someday. N.W., also by Zadie Smith, a tragicomic novel following 4 locals. I want to read that too. On Beauty, also by Zadie Smith, a brilliant analysis of family life, the institution of marriage, intersections of the personal and political, and an honest look at people's deceptions. That's also a someday book, I think. And then last but not least, Feel Free, again by Zadie Smith, and this is her essay collection. So I think I would call that a someday book too. So let's look at the totals here. Of books that I've read, we have 13. Of books that I own and haven't read yet but really want to, we have 14. Books that are currently on my eager to buy wish list, we have 10. Someday books, we have 31. Meh, neutral books, we have 15. And hard pass books, we have 18. Do with that what you will. So have I accomplished reading all of the books you should read by the time you're 30? Clearly not, but a lot of them I would never want to anyway, so that's okay. I would love to hear from you in the comments. So would you like me to do a follow-up video where maybe I'm reading some of the books that I own from this list? Maybe I could do a vlog, or maybe I could do a sit down video and review them once I've read them. Would you like to see me dive into maybe some of the books that I said hard pass to? Are there any things that you think, no, you are wrong, you need to read this? Let me know in the comments if that's the case. But for now, I'm going to love you and leave you and let you get on with the rest of your day. So I will see you in my next upload.